Anyway, tonight's speaker is Ricky Linex. He is the current president of the Native Plant Society of Texas, the statewide organization. And he retired. He's got a lot of very impressive credentials, and I do not have all my notes in front of me. So, Ricky, if you don't mind introducing yourself, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, greetings, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to come and present. Let me get this moved back up to the top here. I retired from the Natural Resources Conservation Service in January of 2021 and had a good career, worked with livestock producers, and then later in my career, mostly with wildlife producers, and had a good time. So 38 and a half years. I was a little bit of a workaholic when I was working, and I wondered if I was going to be able to walk away from it, but didn't have a bit of trouble. It's easy to do. So the program we're going to talk about tonight is pollinators and native plants and what it means for our future. I'm going to start out talking about how it affects livestock producers and wildlife. And I think you'll be able to tie it in that without pollinators and native plants, we're going to be in a little bit of a trouble. So let's see if, so here's a pretty nice sized herd of stocker animals. And just like that stocker right in the middle, most people think cows eat grass. And it's a good thing they can eat grass because we can't eat grass. We can't digest it, but we can eat the flesh of the animals that can digest it. But they do eat more than just grass. Several studies over the past 20 years, 15 studies, in fact, show that on average, the diet of a cow is 75% grass, 16% forbs or wildflowers, and 9% browse or woody plants. So 25% of what a cow eats is something other than grass. So ranchers might, grass is wind pollinated. So ranchers might think, I don't need any pollinators, but they really do. And I was riding with a rancher in a UTV, and we were easing through the herd, and this stocker in the left photo had that stem of cat claw sensitive briar in its mouth. And I said, Emery, stop, let me get a picture of that. And when we stopped, it startled that stocker and he dropped it. And it's there on his nose right now. But when he went back to eating, what he's standing in is Indian grass that's 6 to 8 inches tall, a premier, highly palatable, nutritious grass. And yet he had voluntarily chose to eat that cat claw sensitive briar. The stalkers on the right, they've moved into an area where flat top sedge was growing, not a grass, but a sedge. So animals do eat other than just grass, and it's important we realize that. Now, I want to play this little video. Hopefully it'll play without being too jerky. But tell me what this is that this stalker is eating. Early spring, almost late winter, new growth. That is western ragweed. And that animal, that's not the first time that animal's eaten western ragweed, I would think. He's selecting for it. He's looking for it and making a hand at eating. So they do eat other things besides grass. 7 or 8 years ago, I gave this presentation to a hardcore group of livestock producers, the Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers, when they had their annual meeting in Fort Worth. Same presentation that you're getting tonight. And I started out, I said, now, here's your logo. It's an old hand-drawn longhorn steer. You had it over 100 years. What about updating that logo? I said, pollinators are important. Now, this is European honeybee, may not be native, but if you want something native, how about the queen butterfly? The wing tips just about as long as the horn tips of that old steer. Now, they weren't too impressed with that. They did not change. They've still got the longhorn steer. Within a year, I gave the same presentation to the Texas Wildlife Association. They're hardcore wildlife people, deer raisers, and they started out as predominantly big buck deer growers and producers, but now they've branched into a very uniform stewardship organization. And they've been around 40 years. They've got between 10 and 20,000 members. I'm not sure exactly how many. And this is their logo. No hand-drawn whitetail buck. Pretty good buck, but still hand-drawn. The year I gave this presentation to the TWA, the executive director, he's a tall fella, so he stood out in a crowd, and he was in the audience. I saw him in the hallway later. I'll tell you what he said in just a minute. So I asked the group, I said, how about changing your logo? Let's put a monarch. Let's put a pollinator on there. And if you're not sure about that, how about this honeybee on a water willow flower? Beautiful. But the executive director, as we were walking out in the hallway, I brushed up against him. And I said, what'd you think about that presentation about the changing the logo? And he said, well, I get what you're saying, but I don't think the members are going to vote for it. And they didn't. And I was joking with them. But we have to learn to maybe adjust our thinking and adjust our vision, because what you think you might see in this photo is a white-tailed buck that was shot at first daylight. But under better light and more observation, that becomes a 10-foot tall metal sculpture out in a pasture. But those plants in the background, the mesquite, it's native, but a lot of people don't like too much mesquite. But the flowers are great for pollinators. The broomweeds, flowering in the fall now for pollinators. We need these plants at different times of the year. So we need to calibrate our eye and adjust our thinking to be thinking about pollinators and the native plants. And it doesn't matter what you're trying to manage for, it's going to take pollinators. And yes, the hummingbird's a pollinator, as well as the bees, the butterflies, and lots of other insects can be pollinators. And this gentleman, his name's John James Ingalls. He was a orator, lawyer, Kansas senator. He wrote this in 1870, after the Civil War. That part in the yellow, read that. He was quite the wordsmith. This was way before computers and everything, but he was good with words. Talking about little blue stem, big blue stem. It bears no blazonry or bloom to charm the senses with fragrance or splendor, but its homely hue is more enchanting than the lily or the rose. Yields no fruit in air or earth, and yet should its harvest fail for a single year, famine would depopulate the world. Now, in 1870, when he wrote this, the railroad tracks had not gone across Kansas. To get the food they ate, they either shot it, they grew it, hand harvested it, or they got it shipped in on wagons. Took a while. Now, what he's saying back then would probably be true, but scientists poo-poo that now, as saying, oh, that's not possible. We've got more food available than that. Now, in Kansas today, they can pick up the phone and order live lobster overnight flighted in from Maine, but that wasn't available in 1870. And if you look at this photo, this is from 2011, the start of the 2011 drought, which lasted about 3 years. I took that photo late in mid-July on a ranch in Shackford County, which is just northeast of Abilene. And the grass did not green up that year. Even into the fall, the grass was still dormant, just like you see it here. This was last year's grass, or 2010 grass. So without nesting cover, most ground nesting birds would not survive. And if you had overgrazed in 2010 and you didn't have this much grass, you're going to be out of business in 2011. So it could happen. We could run out of food. So we've got to protect the pollinators and the plants that they pollinate. This is not something new, though. In 1901, Maurice Maeterlinck removed the bee from the earth, and at the same stroke, you remove at least 100,000 plants. So it was known way back then. And 100 years later, the way humanity manages or mismanages its nature-based assets, including pollinators, will in part define our collective future in the 21st century. And he says, the fact is that of the 100 crop species that provides 90% of the world's food, over 70 are pollinated by bees. So we've got to have the bees. I was sitting in the office when I was still working, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, reading. Um, I was eating lunch and reading, looking on the internet, and I come across this little 10 or 12 page pamphlet called Bee Basics, an introduction to our native bees. And I was reading it, and that part that I highlighted in yellow, I put that in yellow just to draw attention. But that sentence hit me like a sledgehammer to the head. What would our world be like without the beauty of flowering trees, shrubs, and wildflowers? And how many of us know that bees pollinate approximately 75% of the fruits, nuts, and vegetables grown in this country? So without the pollinators, the plants that we have out here providing food for wildlife and livestock, if those plants die, old age, drought, whatever reason, without the pollinators, there will be no flowers pollinated, no seeds produced, and there'll be no plants to take the place of those that die. So, what would our world be like without the beauty of flowering trees, shrubs, and wildflowers? Look at this buck. Pretty nice buck. You know, if you count quickly, I think he's about a 12 point, and you'd think he's a massive buck. But look, his antlers are smooth. He's rubbed the velvet off, but look at his neck. He is not a breeding a buck that's in his prime as far as breeding. His neck is not engorged. And look at his ribs. You can see, you know, he's having a hard time. And as he gets up to leave, look at his hip bones showing. This could be what happens to wildlife and livestock without the pollinators and 5, 10 years down the road without the preferred forages that they would like to eat. To his right is ash juniper. To his left is whitebrush. Neither one of them are very good deer foods. So they could go hungry. And if we look at the different regions of the state, the amount of different classes of foods for deer, and this is in the cross timbers and prairies region, up here where I'm at in Weatherford, west of Weatherford. Browse, 36% of a deer's diet. Forbs, 20%. Mast, which is the fruit that usually considered hard fruit, so pecans, walnuts, hickories, acorns, not plums, not the soft fruits, about 20% mast. Grass, only about 12%. And they broke this one out with crops and feeds, maybe deer feeders. If we go to another one, this is an interesting one, the rolling plains area. Think of Abilene on up into the eastern panhandle. In a drought year, deer are having to eat mostly browse. It's perennial. It's going to come up even in a drought. Forbs, only 18%. And grass, 19%. Now, in most years, deer only eat 10 to 12% grass. They can't digest a lot of grass. They've got to have the forbs and the leaf tips of the browse plants that are more easily digestible. But in this case, they're having to find something to eat. So they're eating as much grass as 19%. The chart on the right is the year later, a good rainfall year with improving range condition. The plants are growing, lots of good rains. Now the deer have almost as much forbs, 38%, in their diet as browse, 39%. They're still eating a lot of grass, which is a little surprising, but sometimes that's what they have to eat. This one I really like from the Edwards Plateau Hill Country. This was done at the Kerr Wildlife Area, I believe. Look at the chart on the left, white-tailed deer diets with no grazing by livestock of any kind. Look at the forbs, from 40 to 100% of their diet on into summer. And then fall, it starts shrinking, maybe about 30% of their diet, 40%. But they've got forbs available all season from January through December. They're still eating browse. It's common, not eating much grass. But on the right-hand side, when you have deer that are having to compete for food with heavy livestock grazing, look what happens to the forbs. Only in the spring, when forbs are plentiful, as we know, do the deer have a lot of forbs in their diet. And so with heavy grazing, you might as well say overgrazing. Look at the forbs. It gets hammered by the cattle too. 16% of their diet's forbs. So everything's wanting to find those forbs and eat them, but the deer are going to have to make it up with browse and a little bit more grass. And then the South Texas, Southern Edwards Plateau, all we have to do to show the importance of forbs and browse is just subtract the grass off. So in the spring, 86% of a deer's diet, forbs and browse. Summer, 93, 88% in the fall, 87% in the winter. So deer need these forbs and browse, and cattle need them too. Sheep and goats need them. These are just some facts I found that we can go through. When it gets down here to the bottom, 46 species of bumblebees native to the U.S. But I think Texas got shortchanged. We only have 9 species of bumblebees native. There's some little old states up in the Northeast that have 15, 16 different species of bumblebees. We got 9. If you look at those 2 bees, the bumblebee on the right, I think it's an American bumblebee, on the mealy blue sage, and that bee on the left is a green sweat bee on a flower. How big are these bees? Well, that's my hand on the left in front of or behind the flower of the Texas bindweed. And that flower on the right is a lot smaller than the bumblebee on the left. That young lady's holding that bumblebee. You might think, well, isn't that dangerous? Well, only the females have stingers, so you got a 50-50 chance of not getting stung. But in all truth, this bumblebee, we walked up on it and it was turning little circles about the diameter of a coffee cup on the ground. It was not long for this world. We picked it up and took a few photos, and it never stung either one of us. But we do need different flowers, different shapes, colors, all of that. Whole Foods did an event a few years ago just to showcase the importance of pollination by bees. And they were headlining bees in production of fruits, vegetables, billions of dollars in ag crops. Look at all the crops that benefit from pollination in Texas. Now, this is your produce choices with adequate pollination by bees. And this is your produce choices, which I always thought this looked like a coastal town with a hurricane coming in and the grocery stores about empty. But the fruits and vegetables that are left, these are either self-fertilized, wind fertilized. So we need these pollinators. Here's your dairy choices with pollinators. We got a lot of dairy cows eating a lot of, can't think of the name of that hay right now. But here's your choices without that good hay, the hay that has flowers. So we might have to go back to eating that old plastic margarine if we don't have adequate bees to pollinate the flowers of these plants that the dairy cattle are eating. Now, this photo is the headwaters of the Lampasas River between Hamilton County and Mills County. North part, I guess you could say, northern edge of the Edwards Plateau. This ranch had been grazed for 130 years by cattle, sheep, and goats, and it had native white-tailed deer, just average populations of deer, no exotics. And the husband died about 15 years before this photo was taken. The wife was still living on the ranch, but she had leased it out for grazing, and it was grazed fairly hard. A conservation program came out through USDA called the Riparian Buffer Program, where you could enroll the riparian areas on your creeks and rivers into this program. It was CRP, basically, Conservation Reserve Program for riparian areas. And she enrolled it, and on some of the pasture, she just took the cattle completely out of the pasture because it was a small area. And then on the bigger pastures, the cost share actually included fencing on either side to keep the cattle out of the creek. So this is the way it looked at about the time it went into the program. I want to call your attention to this cut bank right here, sloughing, uniformly short grass. This rock will be in the photos. And then this is the same location 6 years later. The sloughing is healed up. The grass is looking good. Water is still present. It's on both sides of this little sandbar. But what's missing in the photo? What do we not see in May? No wildflowers. The sheep and goats and the deer of 130 years of grazing had taken them out. So there will be times, just like you can see mesquite trees in the background back here, but no mesquites in front, This was probably cleared of brush and reseeded to grasses and forbs. And we need a variety of different flower shapes, big flowers, small flowers, yellow flowers, red flowers, white flowers, all different colors, because the pollinators are looking for sometimes color is what they're picking on. And here we have Nuttall milk vetch on the right, flowering early up here in our country, flowers in late February, maybe even early February where y'all are. Cowpen daisy or golden crown beard, cobia penstemon, which is big enough flower to be a hotel for a bee when it rains. They can get in and out of the rain. Butterfly weed and milkweed, bladderpod sida, silky prairie clover, and standing cypress. Notice the variety of flower shapes, colors. They all benefit different pollinators. It takes a pretty specialized pollinator to get into the flower of this standing cypress, where any pollinator can reach some of these others. Now, all of these insects and birds, bats, can be pollinators. But for the last 10 years or so, the belle of the ball, the pollinator that's getting the most attention is the monarch. And there are actually federal cost share dollars available through the USDA. You can go visit the USDA service center in your county. There are programs where you can clear brush or take an old cropland field and just plant it to a pollinator mix. It'll have some grass, but it'll be heavy in forbs, wildflowers. And so this monarch, what benefits the monarch benefits all pollinators. A rising tide lifts all ships, they say. So what's good for them is good for all pollinators. But back in the 1950s, the question that all the researchers and people that were looking at the monarchs was, where do they migrate to in Mexico? They knew in the spring they came from Mexico through Texas up north. And in the fall, they came back south through Texas and they went into Mexico, but no one knew. And there was a professor up in Canada, Dr. Fred Urquhart. He was a researcher on the monarchs and he wanted to find out. So he put ads in the newspapers in Mexico with a photo of a monarch butterfly. Have you seen this butterfly? Contact me. And eventually he got a reply from a man who worked in Mexico City. He was an Anglo, but he lived down there in Mexico and he was in charge of a textile factory. And this guy was what you would call an early citizen scientist. He liked going up in the mountains, exploring. And he replied to that ad and said, I think I can help you find where the monarchs go. And the very first monarchs that were found, although these are all mountains where the monarchs are known to be now, the very first monarchs were found on Cerro Pelon. And this mountain in the middle is Cerro Pelon. You might say the color in this photo is terrible, but actually the color has been restored as much as I could do. I met Catalina Trail, who was the wife of that Anglo textile manufacturer. She lives in Austin. She's the only surviving member of the original party that found the monarchs. And these photos had been in her attic for 30 years, she said. And the heat down there does not do good things for photos. This is Catalina. She was in her early 20s. Kenneth Brugger was in his early 50s when they married. And she said they went up in this Jeep and they put this little Honda trail bike in the back of the Jeep. And they would take the Jeep as far up in the mountains as they could go. And then they would get the trail bike out and ride as high as it would go. And they would have to chain the trail bike to a tree, she said, because otherwise it would be stolen when they came back. And after I scanned these photos, met her in Austin, we scanned these photos digitally. And I emailed her a few weeks later when I went to working on these. And I said, what color was that Jeep? Because I was trying to get these trees green and it was making this Jeep kind of wash out. And she said, well, it was a cream or a tan color. I said, well, that's close enough. I'm going to leave it like it is. So that was the early days of the monarch search. And this is Catalina with a wrangler, a guide that they hired. And this photo to me is the most historic monarch wintering roost site photo because it's the first photo that shows where the monarchs were. And again, the color is not good, but looking through this little opening right here, she said they saw the monarchs shining, just like you would see this on the left. That's what they saw. And Ken Brugger took the photo of Catalina and the guide there, and that's historic. But now, and you can find photos now that look just like this, except the color will be a lot better. This was up there at 9,000 feet elevation. The Oromel fir tree is what they would roost in, spend the winter in. Look at some of them on the ground. This is a photo of Catalina when a year later after they were discovered. It's a sad photo, beautiful photo of Catalina, but it's sad because what has she got her arm, her hand on? That's a stump from a fir tree that was cut down by the locals, cut into sections, hauled down to sell for firewood. They heated their homes with firewood, they cooked with firewood. And so that was impacting the wintering roost grounds. Now that's why they've got those preserves set up to protect the monarchs. She said that it took, they found the monarchs, I believe, January 2nd of 1975. And she said it took them almost a week to get back down off the mountain and down to a town that had a phone. And they called Dr. Urquhart and told him, we found them, we found the monarchs. And he said, okay, next year I'm going to come and we'll bring a photographer and I want to see it. So in January of 76, Dr. Urquhart and his wife met Ken and Catalina, and they brought a photographer from National Geographic. This photo was the cover of the August 1976 issue. I found this magazine on eBay, bought it, and at the Texas Pollinator Powwow in Kerrville in 2015, had Catalina autograph it for me. So she did a presentation then about the history of finding those and through the years. This is from the magazine. Makes you wonder, why would an old rough Mexican stocker steer eat a monarch? Well, maybe one of them wouldn't have a lot of nutrition, but if you got access to thousands of them on the ground, not all of them are dead. Some of them are, like you can see on his foot, some of them are still alive. But there's micro elements, trace elements. I guess they could get enough to make it worthwhile. We know that monarchs go north up through Texas. They go up here to the Great Lakes. They have to have milkweeds in Texas to lay their eggs on. That this laying the eggs is replicated about 3 more times. Maybe the 4th generation of them gets up here into the Great Lakes area. They need these milkweeds in the spring. They don't need them in the fall. But we need flowering plants through at least 3 seasons of the year, spring, summer, and fall, for the other pollinators. After they're here for a few weeks, they're gone. So we need the rest of the growing season to have different pollinator plants flowering. And while the antelope horn milkweed's probably the most famous for finding eggs of the monarchs, they can also be found on broadleaf milkweed, green comet, several milkweeds, in fact. Now, why are they important for the monarchs? And I may be preaching to the choir here, and excuse me if I am, but the milkweeds contain in their sap traces of cardinalides, which is a bitter chemical. They say it is actually used in the production of some heart medicine for people who have heart issues. But to a bird or a bug that might eat a caterpillar or an adult butterfly, within a few minutes, it'll make them sick and they'll throw up. And this is Dr. Lincoln Brower at the Monarch Reserves down in Mexico, sometime prior to his passing in 2018. He studied the monarchs for 60 years. And he took this photo back about 1960, these 2 photos. That's a tame blue jay. You can see a leg band. Well, they put in its cage, they put this adult monarch, and the blue jay went to attack it, ate it, and about 15 minutes later, it threw up. And Dr. Brower captured that photo, and this is forevermore known as Brower's barfing blue jay photos. So, little history. And if you want to know more about the milkweeds, if you haven't seen this publication, Jason Singhurst, Ben Hutchins, and Walter Holmes put this together. You can find it online as a PDF. all you have to do is Google identification of milkweeds in Texas, and it'll be the first thing that pops up. It has the 36 species of natives and the one introduced being tropical milkweed. Now, there is some mimicry in the world of insects. We know that. The queen butterfly, the viceroy, and I think there's another one that looks a lot like the monarch. This one has yellow stripes where the queen has yellow dots. Monarch has two pair of antennae. Queen has three. Even in their adult stage, look at this mimicry. The queen does not eat milkweeds, but it's trying to use the camouflage of a monarch's coloration to fool predators into saying, don't mess with me because I might be poisonous. So we've got that mimicry going on out in the pastures. This is a monarch munching down on broadleaf milkweed, and this is a queen on rough stem rosinweed. And I had to move this one to get his photo. He didn't like it. He was out here on the end, but I couldn't get him turned just right. So I put him right there, and he acted like he was upset. Now, I was down in Bell County, Temple area, going to a meeting with NRCS the next day. Everybody got there the night before, and I got there in time to call this landowner and see if I could go. This was the Burleson Prairie north of Temple, to see if I could walk around. It's a restored prairie. And while I was walking around in the fall of the year, I was taking pictures, and I came up on this caterpillar munching away on this Maximilian sunflower. And this was on up in October. I thought, my, you're a little late for the world this year. You better, migrate to turning into an adult pretty fast. So I took a few photos and I walked on, and then I thought, well, let me go back and maybe see if he's eating more of the ray petals. Looked like he's going to eat them all. And when I went back, this honeybee was sitting there on the same plant. And it got me to thinking about competition between animals. There's competition between people, certainly between animals, plants, and insects. One animal might outcompete another for food. One plant, ash juniper, grows, shades another plant, hides, keeps it from getting sunlight and moisture. One animal grazes one plant, sets it back, but maybe another plant doesn't get grazed. One flower's pollinated and another may not. So all we can say is the more diversity of plants we have on the land, it benefits all species, including livestock, including wildlife. But being a pollinator is not an easy job. This honeybee was attacked, and this buckeye butterfly was attacked just trying to pollinate, getting nectar or pollen. Now, I want to take us out of Texas. We're going to go up into the Great Lakes regions, and we're going to talk about common milkweed, which is not common in Texas. It's only maybe had been found one time in a Panhandle County 100 years ago. But the counties in dark green are the counties that the USDA plants database recognizes as having common milkweed. If we look at Illinois, every county in the state has common milkweed. Here's the Biota of North America, commonly called BONAP, and it shows where common milkweed is common. Now, here's that one county in Texas where it might have been found, but it's not proven. Now, let's compare that Great Lakes region for its distribution of soybeans. 2010, how many acres are the planted acres by county? The darker, deeper the green, the more acres. So right up in there, Illinois, lots of soybeans. Now, prior to Roundup Ready seeds that were genetically modified to be able to be sprayed with Roundup, if a farmer planted soybeans up here in these areas where common milkweed is so common, they could plow the field and they could spray it before they planted the soybeans. But if they sprayed Roundup over the soybeans to kill the milkweed, it would kill the soybeans. After they got the Roundup Ready crops, now they can spray over the top of the soybeans and kill common milkweed. Now, look at this chart from 1996 through 2002. This is the total U.S. market of soybeans planted. 71, 73, 74 million acres, about 72 million acre average. It didn't go up or go down over that time period. But the blue bars show Roundup Ready soybean acres planted. Notice in 96, only 1%, 8% in 97, and just goes up. And it goes up to 60% in 2002. We come back over here to the Monarch Watch. This is the graph where they are measuring how many acres or hectares of monarchs are overwintering down in Mexico. And in 1997, just about the time the Roundup Ready soybean seed availability took off, here was the population of the monarchs down in Mexico. Here's 2006, about the same population. There's been some up and down. But over here, if we look at 2006 on this chart, it shows herbicide tolerant, Roundup Ready soybeans at about 90%, 85, 90%, and it gets on up into the 90s throughout 2016. So look at what happens to the monarchs. Is this cause and effect? I don't know, but it can't be good because they're able to kill the milkweed up there that the monarchs normally would be using. So it can't be good. What could be done to help that? All of those areas up there that are not being planted, they need to plant common milkweed if it's not already growing. Now, I don't know why I put this chart, I found it on the website of Journey North. I pulled it on Monday, and it's showing through 9/19, which has not even happened yet, but just think about it being pulled this week of 2024. This is where the monarchs are being identified, noticed, and documented. So they're up there right now, right up there where the soybeans are planted. So again, it can be a problem. Here are the monarchs going south, coming right through Texas. We know that. Some go to Florida, a few go to California, down here to Baja, Mexico. But the majority of them are going to come, 90% plus are going to come right through Texas and go on down to Mexico to their wintering grounds. And if you go on Journey North, you can see these monarch peak migration maps, and this will actually, you hit play right here, and it will show you every 2 weeks, a different color pops up showing you where the dots start showing up going south as they migrate south. Interesting. But as they head south through Texas, monarchs need flowers. They need nectar, which is basically like gasoline in a car. You got to fill the gas tank up to go. They need that nectar, and we need water. All living organisms need water. Roadblocks for monarchs. Well, drought. This is the Palmer Drought Index from 2011, the end of August. Look how it was in the exceptional drought over most of Texas. The monarchs that came through here September, October, they were probably having to go to flower beds in towns and cities, parks, wherever people had a little water that they could put on them, because otherwise it was burned up. Overgrazing hurts because it sets back the plants, the forbs, the browse, the flowering plants. Late summer burns takes away the plants for that year, and summer weed sprays are all negative. And again, a diversity of flowering plants. When we think about monarchs, we need to also include fall flowering plants as a specialty, because that's when they're coming back through. Now, if we go back to this, they don't count the monarchs individually. They count the area that the monarchs occupy, and they measure it in hectares. I've converted it to acres for you here. So Catalina and her husband discovered those monarchs in 1975, but they didn't start monitoring till 1994, almost 20 years later. There could have been some high point years back before 94. We don't know. But the highest point in 1996 was the winter of 96, 97 was 45 acres. The low point was 2013, 1.66 acres. Now, how big is 1.66 acres? Well, that facility you're sitting in, the library and the parking lot is just about 1.66 acres. So think about that. 90 to 95% of all the monarchs in 2013 would have fit on top of the building and in the parking lot. We came that close to losing the monarchs. Now, this most recent year is nothing to brag about either, because it's at 2.2 acres, 23, 24. So they are, on a downward trend, which is not good. And we need to help them all we can. Plant fall pollinating plants. That's the best thing we can do for them. So what are some of these? We want natives. We want fall flowering. And then we're going to talk about new plants on the horizon. American basket flower is a beautiful plant. Cattle don't eat it. Sheep and goats don't eat it. A starving horse won't eat it. Deer won't eat it. So it has hundreds of flowers. Good pollinator plant. Flowers May to June. It's not a thistle. It may look like a thistle on the underside, but these overlapping bracts are where it gets the name basket flower for the shape. And for some reason, I don't know why, the inside of this tube is hollow. Just a trivia fact for you. But this area right here is in a pasture down in Hill County, Hillsborough. And I was through there a few months before this in the wintertime, and they had put a rural water line right down this lane. I'm looking down the lane. And the following year in the spring, American basket flower just came up gangbusters. Now, they didn't plant that seed. It was already in the ground waiting on a chance. So the disturbance of plowing up, planting that pipeline gave them the chance they needed to come up. A couple of months later, say midsummer, this is how it's going to look. Again, nothing's eating it. So it made good flowers for the pollinators. And now it makes good seed for the birds that are eating seeds. And you can go out and find basket flower, take the seed head, put it between your two fingers, and take your thumb and just rake out those seeds. I find that very enjoyable out in the pasture just to see those black seeds roll out. And even though we're in September, you can do it right now and find seeds that were produced in June, May, and June, still in the plant. So it's a long-term disposal of those seeds over time as they weather and as the wind blows and they rain, get rained on, they will drop a few seeds. Maximilian sunflower, you're familiar with it, I'm sure. One of our premier native perennial sunflowers. Now, some people say, I just never see that grazed, but I have. This is in a pasture near Stephenville that had cattle, no sheep or goats, just cattle and white-tailed deer only. And they were certainly hammering on the Maximilian sunflower. The good thing about it, it doesn't matter if it's 2 feet tall or 4 feet tall or 6 feet tall. The upper third of that plant, everywhere there's a leaf, it will produce a flower. And it can produce dozens of flowers on these taller stems. Flowers from mid-September all the way to frost. Now, I was taking this photo down a fence line on a state highway in Coleman County a few years ago, taking it because of this Maximilian out here. Notice it's as cattle had reached through the fence just as far as they could stretch to get to it. And as I was leaning over taking pictures, I heard this pickup stop behind my truck. Guy gets out, we howdy each other. He says, "What are you doing?" "That's my land there on the right." I said, "Well, I'm taking a picture down the fence of this Maximilian sunflower." And I took my foot, kind of kicked the plant and said, "Here's the Maximilian sunflower." He looked at me and he said, "Yeah, that doesn't grow on my place." I said, "Yes, sir, I can see that." So sometimes you have to let discretion be the better part. He wasn't going to understand it, I don't think. But look at the grazing, pretty harsh, pretty heavy. Now, the Barditch palatability test, again, Dr. Dale Rollins coined this phrase. If you see a plant in the Barditch more common than what you see in the pasture, that would say or prove that it has palatability. So it's proven here for sure. Now, this is on a ranch in Throckmorton County. It's about 2 acres of Maximilian in a patch, native. It's just there. And in October, it's beautiful. I took these pictures October about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. Just think about this in the fall when those monarchs are migrating through. This is 2 acres of those yellow flowers reflecting autumn sunshine back up into the sky. And to a monarch, they know that that's nectar down there. That's just like us pulling into the world's largest Buc-ee's at Luling, Texas, 250 pumps, no waiting. The monarchs are wanting to fill their gas tank. We just want to fill our gas tank. So we need these fall flowering plants. Dotted gayfeather is another plant that queens and monarchs will nectar on, again, just for the nectar, that time of the year in the fall. Deer will eat this plant though. But if they eat it early enough in the summer, it will regrow some different stems, and these may live long enough before frost to actually flower. Now, narrowleaf, we have 10 or 12 different gay feathers in Texas. This is narrowleaf gay feather. That above ground, they all look very similar. Below ground, the roots are sometimes different. So narrowleaf has a carrot-shaped root. And this is a road cut on a ranch. Notice how much of the root of these two plants is exposed. You might say, well, that plant's green and growing. How can it be that healthy? From this publication called Pasture and Range Plants, put out by Phillips 66 Petroleum, back when they were trying to lease land for petroleum in the 1960s, they gave ranchers this book. And here's a dotted gay feather that shows roots going down 16 feet. Well, in the eastern half of the state, narrowleaf gay feather is probably the more common, but in the western half, dotted gay feather is the more common. And this one's been mowed, that's why it's short. But dotted gay feather has a rounded onion-like corm as opposed to the carrot-shaped root of narrowleaf gay feather. Both good, both fall flowering. Here we have two plants that bees, especially honeybees, love to use for the pollen. Leavenworth Ringo, in the plant book I put together, Range Plants in North Central Texas, I didn't mention it in the book that this was a good pollinator plant for bees. I didn't know it at the time. But in our field office at Grovesbeck, this beekeeper came in and told those guys in the field office, and they relayed the word to me, because each one of these little segments down here is a flower. So there's a lot of pollen to be had down here. Cattle don't eat it, deer won't eat it. Over here, the snow on the prairie, which is found in the eastern half of the state, the more wider, rounded leaf snow in the mountain is the western half of the state. It produces, another beekeeper told me, it produces a honey that will taste hot, H-O-T. And he said some honey producers, not he, but others would call it jalapeno honey because of the heat that it is found. Now, if you buy land in the hill country, the cross timbers, and it has oak trees on it, you're going to get frostweed for free to go with it, because under every oak tree is frostweed. And it's a midsummer to fall flowering plant with white flowers. You see the honeybee on it there. Gets its claim to fame because of if there's sap in the stem with moisture in the soil when you get the first frost, the sap freezes, splits open the stem, and it will exude out these frost ribbons. And it doesn't usually kill the plant the first time if it's just a light frost. And maybe a week or two later, you get another frost, it'll do it again. So have your cameras ready. Go out and check it on the first frost. Mealy cup sage, I tell people this is sort of like a poor man's bluebonnet. It's not even the same family, but it's what it reminds me of. Nothing eats it as far as livestock or deer, and it grows on any soil, from rock to the best clay loam there is. It's a common plant. It's a good one for pollinators, flowers from April to October. So it meets that spring, summer, and fall flowering period. Late flowering boneset, another fall flowering, likes to be near the water, as you can see here. So we'll find it along riparian areas, the banks of creek, ponds and tanks and lakes. Gets up about 3 to 4 feet tall, about that wide, about that broad. But it's a very massive amount of pollen and nectar that it's producing. And again, the monarchs would use this as they head south. Golden crownbeard, also called cowpen daisy. And it gets the name cowpen daisy because it comes up in, maybe you got a cowpen that only has cattle worked in it once or twice a year, and it's basically an abandoned area the rest of the year. It likes to grow in these abandoned areas. So old equipment yards, feedlots, things like that, where there's no animals, it will grow. What's important is notice the flowering period, different years, but look, flowering in early May, flowering in mid-July when it's hot and dry, flowering in mid to late October, still available. It's an annual, and it'll flower as long as there's moisture in the soil. If you get a hot summer day and it turns off dry for a couple of months, it'll go dormant. It'll just mature out. Now, this is a ranch in Mills County that we used to help them do spotlight deer counts on. And it's about 800 acres. It was high fenced, hadn't had any cattle on it for 10 years when I was helping them. It had native white-tailed deer, axis deer, and black buck antelope. That's all it had on it. At the time, when we first started helping them, it had high numbers. It had the old Llano County white-tailed deer densities, you know, deer to 3 acres. It had that many exotics on it. But we slowly got the numbers down. But they were hammering the forbs. Luckily, this ranch has a lot of browse, mostly shin oak. This is um, prickly ash. Here's some shin oak. This looks like a hackberry right here. But the only flower you're going to see in this photo is right down here, gray gold aster. Not a very palatable plant, and it's maybe a pollinator plant for some species, but it's not a very showy plant. Now, we're going to walk across this road, and I saw these plants, and I thought, what is that growing? Notice the live oaks had died. This ranch, 800 acres, has lost probably 1,200 oak trees, red oaks and live oaks. Luckily, it doesn't affect the post oak or the shin oak. But where those oaks died, the flowers they started growing. Now I'm going to walk up to about right here. To the left of me, the trees are still alive. You can see the shadow from the leaves blocking the sunlight. Here's some wild rye. There's Texas wintergrass. Looks like silverleaf nightshade here. But to the right of me, where the sun is shining, and I apologize if this video is a little bit jerky, but let's play this. And you're going to be able to see some butterflies flittering around. Mid-September, there were monarchs here. There were queens here. Now, notice the old dead live oak leaves are droopy. Nothing's been done to this. No equipment's been in there. No disturbance. The only thing that's changed is the trees died, and there was no longer anything blocking the sunlight. So the sunlight was able to get to the ground, and it grew what was there. Those seeds were already in the soil, just waiting for a chance. No telling how long those seeds had been there. So what do you think this is going to look like the next year? Think they're going to come back? Well, I may have to see if I can go to the next slide. Okay, so no, 2 years later, Texas wintergrass had taken over. This is the area where the cowpen daisy was. So the Texas wintergrass is taking it back over, but those seeds are in the soil, waiting for the next disturbance, the next opportunity. So that's why we need those pollinators, keeping these plants available to be brought back in the future. So what are some new plants on the horizon? I had high hopes for this one because of the flowers. I'll tell you a little more about it. We collected seed of this and gave them to the Plant Materials Center, which is a USDA facility in Knox City in the Rolling Plains. And they take seeds and grow them and see if they can be made into plants that are useful. They started out with grasses for livestock production. Now, most recently, they're working on forbs for wildlife and pollinators. These are the counties where it's naturally found. So it's about the western half of the state. One little outlier county over here, about Waxahachie, I think. But in the Rolling Plains, eastern Edwards Plateau, even into South Texas, narrow-leaf globe mallow. Look at the different colors it comes in. This is kind of a pinkish red. I used to remember the names of what was mauve and what was, I'm going to call that lavender. This is kind of orange. I think it was coral too. Look at the flowers, look at the buds. When they planted this seed the first year at the Plant Materials Center, it came up and flowered. It grew that rapidly. And, you know, they were impressed with it. They told me that not any day that they walked by, when they looked at this plot, would they not see some sort of pollinator, some sort of insect. You can see little ones down in here now. So it had high hopes. The good thing about this plant is it flowers over a long period of time, from late spring all the way into fall. That's the good thing. The bad thing about this plant is that it flowers from late spring through fall. When you ever get a chance to combine seed, it's always going to have new flowers. So to make it commercially available, a plant has got to mature seeds basically at one time so they can combine it, clean it, and sell the seed. So we may not see this one on the market. I had hopes for it, but I don't know if we'll see it. This one I talked to Brandon Carr, this is Knox County right here, which is also where the Knox City Plant Materials Center is. And I asked Brandon, how is the plantings of willow leaf sunflower coming along? They planted them back in 2017. And he said, well, it's still ongoing. It takes a long time to get these plants to the point where they can release them. But he said in 2023, grasshoppers hit the center and just ate every leaf, ate the flowers, ate everything on the plant. So they didn't collect any seed. They were fixing to collect seed, send it out for off-site plantings to see how it would grow in other locations. But I was riding along with the local district conservationist, Charlie Shear, and his truck here. And we were in August coming along, going to look at some range seeding that had been done on some of this, not up on the hillside, but down in a flat area, some brushwork and range seeding. And we saw this 4-foot tall plant and flower in August on this old dry, hot site. And I said, Charlie, stop. We got to get out and look at this. I didn't know what it was. I'd seen it in another county when it was about 12 inches tall, and I recognized the leaves, but I still didn't know what it was. So here is, let me go forward. Here's Charlie. We're looking off the edge here. This is a west-facing slope, hot, dry, blue shale clay that's fallen out from under this rock. This is harsh. This is Naco Badlands soil complex. Terrible. Scalded old red clay soils with these gray, blue-gray outcroppings. And here's willow leaf growing down the slope. So we get back in the truck and we drive down off the hill and we come and we're going to be about right here in the bottom. And that's this photo right here. And we see it again, and it's growing on a soil called mangum clay, which is a clay that's about 400 feet deep. It's just a deep clay. It's all it is clay. So it can grow in some pretty harsh soils. So we started collecting seed. And we looked online, and it was only found in 5 counties in Texas originally. Knox County was not one of the counties. And we found it on 2 soils, the Naco Badland and the mangum clay. And over in Cook County, which is one of the counties it was originally found, we found it on Malatir Lido, Hensley loam, Sanger clay, Lindy loam, Purvis clay loam. So you see loams, clays. It's adaptable to some different soils. This soil right here, where this photo was taken, is the Malatir Lido. It's 4 to 6 inches of a chocolate brown loam on top of fractured limestone. And here are those plants right back here growing, as well as right here along the roadside. And this is on a ranch where we were able to collect. And that bucket, I went and measured it. It's not the same bucket, but I measured a 5-gallon bucket today, and it's 14 inches tall. Here's the top of those plants, about 8 feet up. So it's a robust perennial sunflower, sort of like Maximilian. It's perennial and it's native, but it has good seed production. The only problem with it was in August when we saw that, I told Charlie, I said, all right, let's wait till about the 1st of November and we'll come back and harvest seed. We came back 1st of November and it was still in flower. We couldn't harvest seed until mid-December of that year, but that's good for the pollinators. Flowers late into the fall. Here's the flower up close, ray petals, brown disc petals. It's taking a picture, I think, a longhorn beetle up there doing his pollinator bit, and this American bumblebee flew in, buzzed him over, said, get out of the way, bud. I need some nectar and some pollen. It gets the name willow leaf because of these long, thin, willow-like, black willow-like leaves. And again, here's the 5 counties in Texas where it's known from. It's more common up in the Great Plains, especially Kansas. But here's the counties we found it in. We found it in Cook County, Knox County, Grayson County, which is Sherman. We found it in Wise County, Decatur, and we found it in Montague County. So 3 of the original 5 counties, we found it, plus 2 new counties. So it just goes to show these maps are not 100% correct. Now, we didn't even try to go and look in Dallas. It's probably under concrete. And we didn't go and look in Hill County right here because it's probably under rows of corn. It's all plowed up and cultivated. But here it is on the Plant Materials Center back in 2017, that first year it was planted. And that's 1 year's growth, one season's growth. So it's got potential. So keep your ears open for maybe it may be another 5 to 10 years, but willow leaf sunflower should be out there for use in pollinator plantings. Now, looking back, you get it? Looking back, I hope we never come to a time when we don't have wildlife, when we don't have wildflowers, when we don't have pollinators. I found this quote online and it matches up exactly with what we're seeing and what we're saying here. Not a single bee has ever sent you an invoice. And that's part of the problem, because most of what comes to us from nature is free, because it is not invoiced, as in a business, because it is not priced, because it is not traded in markets. We tend to ignore it. Look at those vegetables. Thanksgiving's coming on. No pumpkin pie if we don't have pollinators. Onions go in everything for Thanksgiving. Well, we're not going to have onions. Cucumber salad, nope, not going to have that. Celery goes in lots of stuff, not going to have that. Broccoli salad, no, not going to have it. What about our fruits? We're not going to have many pies because we won't have many fruits. So as you study the pollinator plants and you study the pollinators, like I've been trying to learn for about 10 years now, you can get in touch with your inner pollinator self. And the pollinators sent some words they wanted me to share with you. Words of caution, basically. And what they asked me to share with you is this artwork. When we go, we're taking you all with us. Now, the first time I showed this to that cattle raisers group, I found this on the internet. And I was in a hurry to get it finished. This was the last slide. I was in a hurry to get it finished. And I went online and clicked on, pollinator artwork, something like that. And I found one. It looked like this bee had his fist up in the air. So I clicked on that, copied it, pasted it, closed it out, saved it. When I went there and showed it and got to the end of the presentation and this slide popped up, that bee had his fist up, but he had a finger up too. And I didn't notice that middle finger when I clicked and copied that. So I changed it to this one. So native rangeland, the home of wildlife. I like this sign. It's just simple. Found up in the Panhandle. Manuel De Leon, who was there, his own biologist up there at that time, took the photo. It just brings it all home. Rangeland, forest land, home of wildlife, home of pollinators. And with that, I'll stop sharing. If we have time for questions, be glad to take a question or two.
Thank you, Ricky. We're hearing from the audience here. Very nice presentation. I think, Dick, did you have any comments from the Zoom? Okay. Any questions? There's not an audience microphone, but I can relay them to Ricky if you do. Well, thank you so much, Ricky.
If there's not any, I would like to say thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to get to share the word about pollinators and come to the fall symposium. Thank y'all for being part of the co-host. So we're looking forward to that. Hope to see y'all there.